Hi guys, Stuart here. I hope you're all well and excited for this lesson. This week we're going to be introducing sketching freehand two-dimensional shapes and profiles. And remember, developing our sketching skills is essential for being able to effectively solve problems and communicate design ideas. And we need to continually practice to get good at it. So this sketch lesson should only take about 10 or 15 minutes, and like last week, all you need is blank A4 paper and a black or a blue ballpoint pen. Cool. So today we're focusing on two-dimensional shapes and profiles. And here, often when we want to work out something, we want to work out the form of something before trying to go into three dimensions. It's really helpful to break down the object that you're trying to draw into its basic shapes. If you think about any Apple product, what is an Apple product? Well, basically it's a rectangle with round bits, right? So if we can do round bits and we can draw rectangles, we can draw Apple products. So being able to draw the basic shapes confidently will help us when we start to draw more complex forms. So let's get started with our warm-up. Our warm-up for today is going to be doing our straight lines with the dots, just to get our arms nice and free and moving smoothly across the page. So I'm going to drop down some dots and start swinging across from point to point. Remember, the idea here is to get your arm moving freely, to get nice confident lines going through. I'm really not in a good shape today for my straight lines. I'm missing lots of dots, but that's okay. It's about warming up, not about being beautiful. Right, so warm up your page, get a whole bunch of scribbles, take 30 seconds, 1 minute to get that up, and we will get stuck into our lesson. Okay, so I've done my warm-up, made lots of scribbles. We can move over now into looking at our basic shapes. So we're going to start with squares. Now, when we draw a square, we've got to remember the proportion, and we don't actually need to draw just to the edge. So again, using that same idea of just moving our arm freely, a line or shape starts to get defined by a cross in a line. So if the line extends, it's not a problem because we start to see the shape and not the little edges that stick out after the sides. So if you have a look at this is a terrible square because it's not a square, it's a rectangle. And so when we talk about proportions, we want to make sure that when we're drawing a square, it is actually square and it's got the same length sides, that they're nice and parallel, and that this length is the same as this length, which is the same as this length, and they are all at 90 degrees to each other. So that's a cool square. So what you can do is you can spend the next 5 minutes just drawing a whole bunch of squares on your page. Try and be confident with your squares, draw big ones, draw small ones. That is not a square. So if you make it not square, try and redeem it by bringing it into a square shape. So let's go 5 minutes there. Draw a whole bunch of different squares all over your page. Go. Okay, so I drew a bunch of squares on my page, and it's a really messy page, and there's lots of squares all over each other, and it's difficult to see where one square starts and where one square ends, and it's kind of just like there's too many squares for us to see, and a lot of the time when we're drawing, it can be a problem because we don't see the form coming through from all of the things that are going on the page. And this is where we can start really using line weights effectively to make things pop out. So you should be able to see 3 squares come through nice and clearly, and that one's a little bit squiff, but you can see by making the line a little bit darker, pressing a bit harder when you draw, and you draw over your construction lines. So these are a little bit too dark, the main squares, to be classified as construction lines. I've been drawing too hard for that, but I can draw over a specific square if I want that square to show more than the other ones. So that's a cool opportunity over there to be able to experiment a little bit with different line weights. Try and draw some squares as super light, and try and draw some squares as nice and dark so you can see those come through nicely. Right, so we've gone through squares. Now squares, remember, a square, it's got equal sides, equal angles at 90 degrees, and a rectangle is basically the same thing, but it's just got not a square proportion. So rectangle, if you guys need to know what a rectangle is, then you're in the wrong grade. Okay, so you can draw some rectangles over that, but really the proportion of drawing a square is more of a challenge than the proportion of drawing a rectangle. But as long as we keep those lines at 90 degrees from each other, we've got a square. And it doesn't mean that it just has to be vertical and horizontal. We could draw a square at an angle like this, and that's still a square even though it's not 90 degrees to the page. More or less a square. Right, so you've already spent some time, you've drawn some squares. Let's move on to some triangles. Triangles are a little bit more tricky because we've got a whole bunch of different types of triangles. We can draw I have to remember my geometry. We can do an equilateral triangle, we can do an isosceles triangle, and you guys might have to correct me as to which one is which. I think that's an equilateral triangle, right? It's the same on the left and the right. See how to get the proportion right, it helps to draw a construction line going down the middle to be able to create that equal proportion on the left and on the right. That's an equilateral triangle, right? Because all of the lengths are the same. So let's spend the next 2-3 minutes just drawing a whole bunch of different triangles on your page. Remember, do different sizes ones, big ones, small ones, equal ones, just spastic ones. We can do a whole bunch of different triangles, and the idea is to kind of just get our arm moving freely and drawing different shapes. So after I drew all of my messy triangles, I thought that was too ugly, so I thought let's do something different and try to draw triangles so that no triangle went over the other one, and we've got a nice kind of messy triangle thing going on there. And again, don't worry too much. If you don't get the line right the first time, you can go over it again. No art critic is going to be looking at this. This is just to kind of get you an opportunity to draw a whole bunch of different shapes and forms using two-dimensional shapes. So we've got triangles, we've got squares. I think let's leave it there. We've run over quite a lot of time already. So I hope you had as much fun as I did, and we'll catch you guys next week.